will now continue our discussion from this very process of sensation. What we have done till now as part of our first lecture was that we just saw how these sense modalities, they acquire the information, the external information from the world, and then how the signal gets processed in the brain. And then we discussed that well, we all try to assign a meaning to what we have seen, and depending on the meaning that we assign to the object that we have perceived, we have seen in fact, not even perceived, we try to look at the appropriateness of that meaning. If we are able to give an appropriate meaning, fine, perception has taken place. Sometimes we do commit error while doing that. Okay. So, in the process of sensation nothing went wrong, but while assigning a meaning we do commit an error, and that is when we say that illusion has taken place. We little later we will also come to illusion, but right now I will go into little more detail of the perceptual phenomena. But before that, although I do not want you to go into detail of it, I would just like you to very quickly look at the screen, and you see this is the major connection of the visual system. Now, when you look at the major connections, ultimately you realize that it is the tertiary and the paralimbic system of the brain which gets activated at the end. And remember, these are the areas of the brain which has to do with emotions. Okay. Similarly, if you look at the major connections of the auditory system, right from the process at the level of inner ear, where the eighth nerve starts conducting the information, you realize that finally once again the sensory mechanism in terms of its neural underpinning goes up to the tertiary and the paralimbic area. In terms of odor recognition, in terms of smell, again we see that the limbic system gets into picture. And if you look at the taste mechanism, once again the lateral hypothalamus and the amygdala gets into action. What primarily you see here, again for even fine touch, pressure and kinesthesis, that once again the tertiary and the paralimbic area gets activated. What is important to realize here is that every time whenever we have this process of sensation taking place and the brain trying to assign a meaning to what we have sensed, the areas of the brain which are actually supposed to take care of the emotional aspect, that gets activated. So, whenever we sense from the external world, the process of perception is not what you call free from emotion. So, the moment we try to assign a meaning, remember last time we had discussed in the previous lecture that right at the level of sense modality, we can store the information for a very brief period of time. Okay. And I told you that remember this whenever we come to our discussion on memory, at that time once again we will talk about sensory memory, and this was with reference to iconic memory. So, memory gets activated. Here now we are saying that fine, emotion also gets activated, and emotion would be the last topic that we would be talking about as part of this very course. Now, that we have understood how sensation is conducted in the brain, how the brain assigns a meaning to it, the key question is that is it that we process each and everything that comes to us? So, do we see everything that is available in the visual spectrum? Do we hear everything in the environment? Do we smell everything? Do we sense everything? So, how, what, on what ground does the brain decide that this has to be processed and this has not to be? Okay. Now, there are many things with respect to perception. I am in a particular type of environment. There are external stimuli around me which comes to my brain through my sense modalities, and at the same time I am at a particular type of a position in the given environment. So, the perspective that my particular sense of modality will take, for example, if I am looking at the camera right now, okay, the perspective of the object which is available in my visual field, okay, other type of external stimuli, and at the same time my own decision to act the way I want to at that point in time in the environment. So, there are many factors that will now come into picture. What we are doing right now for the purpose of understanding the perceptual process, what we are doing that in this very lecture we would be talking more about those external factors that has to do with the strength of the signal. Okay. So, we are looking at the external factors right now, we are not looking at the other aspects. Other aspects we will come in the coming days. Now, the most important thing when it comes to the external factors is the concept called threshold or lumen. Three terms are to be remembered here: the absolute lumen, the difference lumen and the terminal lumen. Now, absolute lumen means that this is the minimum intensity of the stimuli that you can detect a minimum 50% of the time. So, whenever you have absence and the presence of the stimuli, you should be able to detect it half of the time. Okay. Now, difference lumen is basically nothing, but it is the smallest difference between two stimuli that you can detect. And then comes the terminal lumen, where you realize that the threshold changes to the extent that you do not consider the sensation, the perception to be exactly what you thought it initially was. The nature of the sensation changes. Okay. Now, let us understand this with an example. You just know on your computer monitor where you are watching this lecture right now, okay, just minimize the volume, make it come to 0. Okay. And now you start increasing it, slide the slider now, and then you realize that although physically the value changes, no, it says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, likewise, no, you get a indicator which tells you that the sound quality has changed, it has increased, but somehow you are not able to listen to it. Okay. So, the first case when it was 0, there was complete absence of this auditory signal. Okay. You can do the same with the visual signal. No? You turn your screen black and then you gradually start adding brightness and contrast features, and then you realize, okay, that although physically things are changing, psychologically you are not able to make out. So, in the first case, although the sound level is changing, you are not able to detect it, you are not able to hear it, and then comes a time above which you can hear me. Okay. So, similarly, if you change the brightness contrast feature, okay, there would be a point when you would be able to make out that, okay, this is the object available on the screen right now. Okay. So, that very intensity of the stimulus where from absence to presence can be detected by you, okay, that is called absolute lumen. Now, although you are able to make out that I am saying something, you are not able to detect the increase in the volume. First case was 0, means absence of the process to presence. Now, within presence you want to increase the volume. Now, you again use the slider and you see that physically the sound level is increasing, but then you realize that the notable difference that you wanted to make, that you wanted to increase the volume up to this level, that is somehow not reaching. And then comes a point when you realize that yes, now the sound quality has changed, it has increased. And then if you still continue moving it beyond 100%, 150%, 180%, then you suddenly realize that this is no more a lecture, it converts into noise. So, that very threshold where the intensity of the sound becomes painful for you, the lecture converts into noise, is terminal lumen. So, in terms of external attributes of the stimuli that we are sensing in order to assign a meaning to it, okay, what is the intensity of that very stimuli? Absolute lumen, difference lumen, terminal lumen has an important role to play there. Okay. Now, along with this comes an interesting thing. Okay, right now we have talked about it, that we have to make a distinction between the previous and the new state. Weber gave a law, basically this is talked about in the area of psychophysics. In experimental psychology you will come to read about it. Here we would be very briefly looking at it, what it means and why it is so important for psychologists to understand Weber's law. He says that the just noticeable difference in the stimulus is the proportion of the magnitude of the original stimulus. Okay. So, there is a smallest level of difference between two given points of a sensory stimulus, okay, that can be detected. So, if you are able to realize that this is the magnitude of the original stimulus, and if the magnitude of the incoming stimulus is above this level only, then the difference can be detected. The best example of it could be that you hold a torch in your hand, okay, and go in a bright daylight. Whether your torch is switched on or off, you are not able to make a sense out of it, because the outside light is brighter than the light of the torch. Okay. But the same phenomena if you repeat in dark situation, you would very easily be able to detect, okay, that your torch is on. The reason being that the magnitude of the stimulus, okay, the intensity of the light which is emitted by the torch, okay, in the first case is much less than the light already available in the environment. So, during daytime you do not detect that the torch is on, whereas in the night hour you are able to detect it. Okay. Take another example, if the headlight of your vehicle is on, okay, now during daytime once again you will not be able to make out whether the headlight is on or not. In the dark situation, okay, whenever the outside light decreases, okay, you would very easily be able to say that, okay, the headlight of my vehicle is on. Okay. So, now because the existing intensity, the intensity of the existing stimuli, if that is strong enough, then the intensity of the new stimuli has to be above that to be detected. Okay. That is what is called as just noticeable difference. I will give you two examples here. The first example is of the change in the brand name. Okay. When IBM introduced Lexmark printer, okay, look at the change in the logo that you see of IBM here. In the first case you see only IBM, now you see IBM Lexmark 4029 by Lexmark. Just look at the font size also. Okay. So, earlier you had only IBM, now you have addition of laser printer 4029 by Lexmark. Now there is a change, no? Suddenly IBM laser printer 4029, the font size decreases and Lexmark has replaced the remaining space, and then you see Lexmark goes on the top, laser printer 4029 comes at the bottom and IBM is removed. Now this is an interesting application of just noticeable difference. Now if you look at the first logo and the last logo, you see a big difference. Why? You saw that difference because there was the difference in the space in the defined area of the logo, okay, had stark difference. But if you look from one phase to the other and gradually if you look at the four phases, that means that while positioning this printer, IBM wanted that in the memory of the users, okay, Lexmark printer should be attached to IBM, and therefore, it should not be considered that this is something new that has come to the market, rather the existing brand name should suffice the positioning of Lexmark printer. Okay. Now let us come to another example. This is the example of Betty Crocker. Now Betty Crocker over the years, okay, when they changed their brand ambassador, okay, now look at this change, no? Right from 1936 to 1996, okay, you see that a series of models were used for endorsing the product. Okay. Now the lady in 1936 is far different from the lady that you see in 1996. Okay. But if you look at the intermediate phases, no, the model who endorsed the brand in 1936 and the get up of the model who endorsed the brand in 1955. You see much of a similarity. Similarly, between 55 and 64, 64 and 68. Okay. And then you realize that Betty Crocker basically what it was trying to do is that the models who were endorsing the brand, the difference in their physical appearance, they tried their best to make it come below the just noticeable difference level. Okay. Now, if the previous and the new, these two models, their physical appearance, if it does not touch the just noticeable difference level, that means that you would consider that some makeup has been changed, but by and large the person who endorses the brand remains the same. Okay. These are the interesting applications of just noticeable difference, okay, in our real life. Okay. Now, the change that is required for getting a stimulus perceived as different will always depend on the initial strength. That would mean that stronger is the stimulus in the first case. For establishing your brand in the present example, you require that the signal of or the strength of the incoming stimulus should be very strong. You must have seen these two ads of Madhya Pradesh tourism. Okay. Now, let us look at the first ad.
बंदर देखा, हाथी देखा, बारहसिंघा और चीतल देखा, मोगली के जंगलों में शेर खान को देखा, पचमढ़ी सतपुरा का अजूबा, भोपाल लेक में सूरज डूबा, मंडू का जहाज महल और मार्बल का पहाड़ देखा, महाकाल मंदिर में पूजा, फोटो खींचा जाके ओरछा, ग्वालियर के किले में भटका, खजुराहो ने दे दिया झटका। पूर्वजों को मिलने जुलने जा पहुंचा मैं भीमबेटका, ट्रेन की चुक चुक सुनते सुनते आ पहुंचा मैं सांची स्तूपा, सांची की शांति में खुद के अंदर झांक देखा, हिंदुस्तान का दिल देखा, हिंदुस्तान का दिल।
The heart of incredible India, Madhya Pradesh.
Now, you have a very nice depiction, okay, in a very artistic form. The major tourist destinations of Madhya Pradesh has been shown to you. This was one of the very popular ads of tourism. And then much later in 2013, another ad for Madhya Pradesh tourism came into being. Now, remember one thing, the way the previous ad, no, which said no, Hindustan ka dil dekho, see the heart of India, and the way the entire tourist destinations were depicted and the face of the women was taken into account to express the emotional component that would be embedded in this whole phenomena was certainly something very exceptional. Now, when in 2013 Madhya Pradesh tourism decided to replace this very ad by another ad, okay, there was a necessity because the first signal had such strong strength that the next ad had to be much more superior to that in terms of its signal. Okay. I am basically talking about this very example to explain the importance of Weber's law in psychology. Now, look at this very ad.
ये रंग है रंग है रंग है, 100 तरह के रंग है, रंग है रंग है रंग है, 100 तरह के रंग है, कान्हा में सैकड़ों शेर दहाड़े, हर कोई देखे आंखें फाड़े, वो आंखें फाड़े आंखें फाड़े आंखें फाड़े आंखें फाड़े, खजुराहो की खामोश मूरत, प्यार की कितनी प्यारी सूरत, एमपी में आया हर कोई, दंग है वो दंग है, दंग है वो दंग है, मांडू का महल देखने आए, जहाँ काशी में आके स्तूपा देखा, शांत होकर हिंसा को फेंका। एमपी में आई हर रूह, मलंग है, मलंग है, मलंग है, मलंग है। ये महाकाल की पूजा, दृश्य न कोई दूजा। एमपी में आई हर रूह, मलंग है।
What you see here, okay, is that the same tourist destinations which was depicted in the previous ad, okay, are once again being visibly shown to you. Okay, but this visual representation is in terms of using various colors, okay, in different beautiful hues. Now, the form is created of the say tourist destinations that was shown in the previous ad also, but instead of showing you the image of the tourist destination, now it is colors in different hues which are used to give you the mental image of that. Okay. And this would primarily show you that, see, the previous ad was so emphatic that the next ad had to have very strong strength of the signal to be received, okay, if it is going to replace the existing ad. Okay. So, in terms of real life situations, this is how Weber's law plays a very, very important role. Okay. So, till now what we have discussed is that the incoming inputs from the environment, okay, they are assigned a meaning, and once we succeed assigning a meaning to it, we say that this is perception. Okay. Now, to ensure that sense modality receives stimulation, the stimulus must reach absolute threshold. Okay. Therefore, absolute threshold becomes the minimum intensity of the stimulus that the receiver can detect at least 50% of the time. When we attach a meaning to what we have sensed, we say that perception has taken place, and whatever we experience is our perception. Therefore, the sensory cues that are received by the brain and the relevant past experience that one already has, it is derived back to our working memory in order to provide a meaning to whatever we have sensed. Okay. So, this is how perception takes place, but remember one thing, perception need not always emulate reality. The raw information that is received by the brain is transformed or it is reworked in order to perceive. Hence, a percept is an outcome of mental process such as form synthesis, such as feature differentiation, recollection of past experiences, and stimuli comparison. So, these operations can either follow a top down process or it can follow a bottom up process. Let us understand this.
The knowledge and memory pertaining to the stimuli and the language to understand and express it are crucial. Expectations and belief and motivation are also important. All these constitute mental processes and are top down processes. The environmental stimuli are processed by the sensory organs. This leads to sensation. These stimuli undergo perceptual organization based on their inherent characteristics. These are the bottom up processes. A synthesis of these two processes leads to identification or recognition of the stimuli.
Let us now understand perceptual cycle proposed by Nasser.
In 1976, Nasser proposed a model integrating the bottom up and top down processes into a cyclic process. This model focuses on perception, attention, and categorization. While perceiving an object, one selectively attends to the available information. This is further modified by anticipatory schemata.
So, what we have understood now is that any percept that can be categorized, okay, for assigning a meaning has to be differentiated in terms of figure and background. Okay. So, while the pattern that becomes the focus of the attention becomes the figure, the backdrop against which the figure is seen, okay, is considered as background. For instance, if you are looking at me right now, so if I am the object, then this green background against which you look at me becomes the background. Say if I write something on this green board and if you are looking at that very object, although I stand in front of that green board, okay, I become part of the background, and the concept, the alphabets, the sentences written on the green board becomes the object. So, figure and ground always remains interchangeable in nature. Okay. And little later we will come to the concept of contour, where we would be basically talking about the fact that more and more you are able to make a distinction between figure and the background, okay, more clarity you have in terms of perceiving object in the real world. Okay. So, we will end here, and we will once again continue with the strength of the signal in our third lecture.